Assalamu alaikum. Our today's lecture is third lecture in series of lectures on thyroid disorders, and it is again in the same case format where we discuss about the case presentation and then the differential diagnosis and diagnosis. A 23-year-old female who is a postgraduate university student in Punjab University was referred from eye department where she was been under treatment for unusually bulging and gritty eyes along with blurring of and double vision for last few months. Her class fellow who accompanied her reports about her to be an extremely nervous lady who is always anxious, restless and having a mercurial personality. On further inquiry, she reports about trembling of her hands and excessive sweating of palms, particularly when she is attempting her paper during exams, so much so that she keeps a towel with her to avoid paper getting wet. She also has a lack of sleep or insomnia. She has increased bowel movements or passes 3 to 4 stools in a day. Her appetite has increased, but she has not gained any weight. And she also complains of difficulty in standing up from sitting position and climbing stairs without support. This was a picture, not of her. This has been taken from the net, but this is what she exactly resembled at that time. Her neck showed a diffuse swelling in front of the neck, which on swallowing moved with deglutition, suggesting that it was an enlarged, diffused enlarged thyroid. Her hand shows tremors. The shins showed this multiple slight swelling or edematous feeling, which was non-pitting, and the nails were easily separated from the nail bed. Into this we call as onycholysis. A combination of all this that she has symptoms suggestive of hyperthyroidism, along with there are some eye changes. Primarily, she presented in the eye department. There was changes in their say skin or dermopathy, and then there was changes in her nails. So this combination is a near classical picture of Graves' disease. Now, Graves' disease is the most prominent feature of that is the exophthalmos or proptosis or bulging or protuberant eyes. Now, Graves' disease is a triad of three things. It's goiter, along with thyrotoxicosis. There is ophthalmopathy and there is dermopathy. So, combination of goiter with thyrotoxicosis, ophthalmopathy, and dermopathy is called Graves' disease. This is in autoimmune in nature, and this is characterized by hypothyroidism due to circulating autoantibodies, and these autoantibodies are stimulatory type of antibodies. So this is thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins which bind to and activate the thyrotropin receptors, receptor for the thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid gland hypertrophies and the thyroid follicles increase, and there is increased synthesis of the hormones. This is to understand that these B cells, they produce say immunoglobulins, and these immunoglobulins, thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin. These immunoglobulins act onto the thyrotropin or TSH receptors. They activate these receptors, and this activation of receptors, the thyrotropin receptors become active. So they, in response to this thyrotropin or TSH, they lead on to some hypertrophy of the thyroid follicles. Thyroid itself gets enlarged, and it uptakes iodine more avidly, and this results in an increased synthesis of both the T3 and T4. And obviously, when the T3 T4 is high, they then act onto the pituitary, and this would lead on to decrease in or suppression in the TSH. So the combination of a raised T3 T4 along with TSH. So this is the mechanism for developing hyperthyroidism or thyrotoxicosis in these patients. On the other hand, in the eyes, the retroorbital fibroblasts, they undergo hypertrophy, and there is also involvement of the T cells, and these T cells produce inflammatory cytokines, and these cytokines then lead on not only to the hypertrophy and hyperplasia of the fibroblast, but they also lead on to an increased production of glycosamine aminoglycans, which is deposited into the around in the orbit, and then there is anti orbital muscle antibodies which then are responsible for ophthalmopathy. So these are the two pathogenic mechanisms for hyperthyroidism and ophthalmopathy. Both, one is B cell mediated production of immunoglobulin, and other is the T cell mediated activation of the cytokines. As we discussed, the most of the Graves' disease is autoimmune. Why this antibodies start producing, there is not exact mechanism known. There is sometimes called as that there is an expression of viral antigen or self antigen which is previously hidden. There may be some specificity of crossover between the cell antigen and infectious agents or a super agent antigen, we don't know. Or there may be an alteration of the T cell repertoire. There is idiopathic antibodies becoming pathogenic antibodies. So there may be sometime new expression of HLA class 2 antigen. So there are various mechanisms proposed for the immune system getting activated and leading on to production of stimulatory antibodies which stimulate the thyroid gland. Sometimes it may be part of polyglandular autoimmune syndrome. It may be associated sometimes with an underlying thyroiditis like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, maybe with rheumatoid arthritis, and there are other immune system disorders which may be associated with the Graves' disease. The incidence as far as primary thyrotoxicosis is concerned, 60 to 90% of cases of thyrotoxicosis, they are because of Graves' disease, and rest maybe 10 to 40% of the cases may be because of, as we discussed previously, because of toxic adenoma or say increased thyrotoxicosis without antibody mediated. It is more commonly seen in women, and all age group are affected, but maybe in can be more common in the age group of 30 to 60 years. Generally 2% of the female population does or may suffer from Graves' disease, and as far as the male to female age is concerned, it is quite heavily in favor of female to the tune of 7 to 8 times more common in women as compared to men. The symptoms we have already been discussing in previous lectures of thyrotoxicosis. They tend to appear more nervous, there are tremors, tachycardia, they have hyperdefecation or frequent passage of stools, they sweat a lot, they are intolerant to heat, and sometimes they can have, particularly women, we can have both oligomenorrhea and amenorrhea. Visibly there is goiter, they may have a weight loss and insomnia, palpitation is a common feature, there may be some degree of hypertension, and as we described, hair and nail changes in the form of onycholysis can be seen, and sometimes they can present with atrial fibrillation or a new onset atrial fibrillation. On examination, gland is almost always universally enlarged. It is uniform, diffuse type of gland enlargement, no nodule, and the gland is soft in consistency. It is not firm or hard. Gland, there is maybe because of increased blood supply to the gland to produce more, say, hormone. The gland is vascular and maybe some warmth may be felt. And if you auscultate, the increased blood flow through the thyroidema artery may be responsible for a bruit to be auscultated. The cardiovascular examination is in the manifested as tachycardia. It would depend upon the pulse rate. Thyrotoxicosis based on the heart rate can be called as, if the pulse rate is between 90 to 100 is a mild thyrotoxicosis or mild symptoms, moderate when heart rate is between 100 to 110, and when heart rate is more than 110, we may consider the thyrotoxicosis to be a bit severe. Patient can complain of palpitation, there can be extra systoles or extra beats noted, and this hyperdynamic circulation may be responsible for a very say hyperactive type of apical impulse, and sometimes you may hear a third or fourth heart sound depending upon the degree of flow and degree of say heart failure if it occurs. and someone who has atrial fibrillation would definitely have an irregular heart rate and rhythm. This is the exophthalmos or proptosis, and look at these eyes. Normally, you don't see this sclera or white area in a normal resting position of the eye, but whenever this is visible and eyes protruded, bulging out, this is called as exophthalmos or proptosis. Some people may have a more prominent starry eyes, so you have to look for other features of exophthalmos as well. The eye signs, as we said, proptosis is one. Lid lag, when you ask the patient to look down, the lid, upper lid lags behind and the sclera becomes visible. Lid retraction in a normal position, as is shown in the previous diagram or figure, that retracted lid, upper lid would make upper sclera visible in a resting position. Then they are unable to converge their eye, or when you are asked them to focus something near object, normally the both eyeballs would move medially. But this failure of convergence, they are unable to converge their eyes, and they can't focus on a near object. Conjunctiva may become more congested and may redden chemosis, and sometimes these eyes, since they are protruding out, the eyelid cannot close it, they remain exposed to the say dust and air, so there is exposure keratitis, or there may be inflammation seen in the cornea. The varying degree of retraction or spasm of the upper lid may be assessed by various say methods and various say signs, like Derimpel sign when the puscular is visible above the limbus, as we mentioned. Nefziger method, that you stand behind your patient and look at the supraciliary arch over here, and if the eyes ball is protruding outward, it is a sign of proptosis. This is the demonstration of Mobius sign, or inability to converge or look medially. This is Talweg sign, that there is these patients, because of already retracted bulging, they have infrequent bulging, and their palpebral fissure is wider, and due to spasm of sympathetic fibers in the levator palpebrae superiorus muscles. There are other various signs, that Joffre signs when there is absence of wrinkling over the forehead. Von Graffe signs is another name for the lid lag. And sometimes this exophthalmos may attain to an extent that there is severe swelling of the chemosis of the conjunctiva, bulging of the eyes, redness, and some hemorrhage into it. And this occurs in untreated, say, Graves' disease, and this is called as malignant exophthalmos, and sometimes it may pose as a eye emergency, right? So in advanced stages of this orbital swelling, there may be pressure onto the optic nerve, and this optic nerve pressure can lead on to say frank blindness. Now, thyrotoxicosis again can also present with myopathy, or in myopathy there is an inability, particularly proximal muscle weakness. The patients are unable to hold their hand above arm above their heads, or they are difficult in standing from the sitting position. And weakness of the extraocular muscles sometimes can result in diplopia, and of course these myopathies are correctable with the management. This is again development swelling around the shin and around the the ankles, and this is a non-pitting type of swelling or edema, as is seen in hypothyroidism. But this is again this diabetic thyrotoxic dermopathy, and this is because of the symmetrical deposition of myxomatous tissue in the pretibial region. Their skin is dry, but this is non-pitting, and this may be associated with clubbing of the fingers and toes as well. This is how this dermopathy looks like. Uh, Acropathy is combination of signs in the hands. Many patients with Graves' disease can have clubbing, and then there may be some swollen fingers. There may be periosteal new bone formation. So this is again dermopathy. This is thyroid acropathy, and combined together. And look at the enlarged thyroid as well. This combined together is called as thyroid acropathy. You can have primary thyrotoxicosis, which mean that the primary pathology is in the thyroid, and you can have a secondary thyrotoxicosis when the primary pathology is in the pituitary, or increased TSH production and increased, say, synthesis of the hormones. So primary thyrotoxicosis is usually more common in 15 to 25 year of age, whereas the secondary is between 25 to 40 years. Symptoms appears simultaneously and duration is short, whereas secondary thyrotoxicosis has long duration of swelling and short duration of symptoms. Skin over the gland is usually warm in primary but not warm in the secondary. Consistency of the gland is soft to firm, whereas secondary thyrotoxicosis it is firm to hard. Surface is usually smooth in primary thyrotoxicosis or in Graves' disease, whereas it's nodular in secondary. Bruit is more commonly heard in primary thyrotoxicosis but not in secondary. Eye signs are more common in primary thyrotoxicosis or in patient with Graves' disease, where they are not seen in patient with secondary or nodular type of varieties. Predominant signs in this primary are more of CVS in the form of palpitation and atrial fibrillation and heart failure, where in secondary thyrotoxicosis the primary symptoms are because of the CNS, which may be because of an enlarging pituitary adenoma, which is responsible for increased TSH. So the symptoms may be because of that in the form of headache and visual disturbances. Peritoneal myxedema is usually seen in primary thyrotoxicosis or Graves, but it is not seen in secondary thyrotoxicosis. So these are the points which helps you in differentiating between the primary and secondary thyrotoxicosis. The diagnosis, of course, is by physical examination plus a triad of uh, goiter, thyrotoxicosis, dermopathy, and acropathy. The laboratory findings are CBC, maybe normal or maybe slight leukocytosis may be seen. Since these patients may be losing weight and may be having, say, to be ruled out that they are not having diabetes, so you have to check their fasting post blood sugar. Similarly, urine examination may be required to rule out like the Surya or any other urine involvement. Chest X-ray, including neck and indirect laryngoscopy. Sometimes these patients may have recurrent laryngeal nerve compression, and which may be presenting with either hoarseness or paralysis of a vocal cord, and this which may be visible on indirect laryngoscopy. And of course, when you check their pulse rate while they are sleeping, they would have a pulse rate or resting tachycardia in sleeping condition. Normally, during sleep, your pulse rate is normal or reduced. This we have already shown that in a patient with if you check for their thyroid scan or iodine uptake, the gland takes or concentrates the iodine into all its dose. So the gland is not only enlarged, but it shows more uptake of the iodine. The TSH would always be low and free T4 would be high. There are thyroid autoantibodies, and nuclear scintigraphy would lead on to show us an increased uptake, diffusely increased uptake by the thyroid gland. The antibodies which we usually check are anti-thyroid peroxidases or anti-thyroid thyroglobulin. Similarly, the TSH receptor antibodies can also be checked. They are not routinely measured, but if checked, they would be helpful in making or confirming the diagnosis. Thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins or the TSH receptor antibodies are found in 80% of patients, and TSH binding inhibitory immunoglobulins may be present in 60 to 90% of these patients. Aim of our treatment of Graves' disease to restore patients to a euthyroid state, to reduce the functioning thyroid mass to a very critical level, about 6 to 8 gram of thyroid tissue, and to minimize the complications. So how do we do that? We reduce thyroid hormone production or reduce the amount of thyroid tissue by use of antithyroid drugs, which leads on to decreased synthesis of thyroxine by the thyroid gland by reducing or blocking the uptake of iodine by the gland, or concentration of the iodine by the gland. And the two drugs are propylthiouracil and carbimazole. Subjecting these patients to radioiodine by ingestion, that they are asked to drink radioactive iodine, then this radioactive iodine destroys the thyroid say follicles and the cells, and would lead on to some benefit or recovery. Sometime both of these options do not work, then you might have to go for surgery, and then you have to, for symptomatic treatment of tachycardia, you have to use beta blockers like propranolol. Beta blockers can be used in a dose of atenolol in dose of 50 to 100 milligram orally daily, or propranolol in a dose of 40 to 80 milligram per orally, maybe 2 to 3 times a day. Carbimazole usually is used in the dose of 20 to 40 milligram a day. Can be given as thrice a daily dosage, or maybe as a single dose as well. Similarly, methimazole can be given in the form of in the dose of 5 to 20 milligram, and propylthiouracil is safe to be given in pregnancy and children. So if a pregnant lady or a lady who is planning pregnancy is diagnosed to have the thyrotoxicosis or Graves' disease, the propylthiouracil is preferred drug, and carbimazole and methimazole are teratogenic. The advantages of antithyroid drugs are that you need not to have surgery or its complication, like a surgical complication can include a damage to the recurrent laryngeal nerve or damage to the parathyroid glands. It avoids radiotherapy. Clinical improvement is seen in about 2 weeks, and biochemical improvement or decrease in the level of thyroxine and T3T4 usually takes 6 weeks. The disadvantages are that you have to take it for a very long period, maybe up to 2 years. Even after stopping the medication, there is 40% chances of relapse, and similarly, it may lead on to reduction in the thyroxine production and thyroxine level, but does not lead on to shrinkage in the swelling, or the goiter may not regress at all. And then these drugs are not free of side effects. The major side effect of carbimazole or methimazole is agranulocytosis or thrombocytopenia. They can damage the liver and lead on to abnormal LFTs, and sometimes they may result in hair loss. The second option is that we give them say high dose of iodine. So when you give a very high dose of iodine, the receptors are say suppressed or blocked, and this may be used as a preoperative measures to reduce the vascularity, and it would make the gland firm and hard, and it would be easy to handle during surgery. So usually 10 to 12 drops of Lugol's iodine 3 times a day for 10 days before surgery would render the gland euthyroid. Then you may use the radionuclide ablation of thyroid gland, and surgery may be in the form of a total or subtotal thyroidectomy. Radioiodine therapy indications are that particularly in people more than 45 years of age, and primary thyrotoxicosis or Graves is the diagnosis, so radioiodine preferred. If it is recurrent, that you treat it once with the medication and it recurred, then it is a better option to go for radioiodine. And similarly, someone who has an autonomous toxic nodule, we discussed in the previous lecture, they are candidate for radioiodine therapy. But it is given only after the age of 45, as there are chances of genetic mutation, there are chances of inducing leukemia or carcinoma in younger individuals. It usually takes around 3 months to give full response, so the patient is put on antithyroid drugs. But before this radioiodine therapy is instituted, we first render these patients thyroid and then stop this antithyroids because they block the uptake of iodine by the glands. And if they are on antithyroid drugs, the radioiodine administered would not be taken up by the thyroid follicle, and the patient may not get the desired effect. But after you have administered the dose of iodine, following that, then you may start them on antithyroid drugs so that they, by the time the radioiodine has its effects, the patients are rendered euthyroid. Sodium iodide or iodotope or iodine 131 is a more suitable option for radioiodine therapy. It is quickly absorbed and very rapidly taken up by the thyroid gland. Since no other tissue is capable of retaining radioactive iodine, so therefore the effects on the other tissues other than thyroid are negligible or minimal. Usually it is given the dose of 75 to 150 microcurie. It has to be estimated according to thyroid gland size and the amount of uptake. And then, as we said, that we have to discontinue antithyroid therapy 3 to 4 days before the administration of radioiodine. The advantages of radioiodine are that you don't require surgery, duration of treatment is not pronounced, a single sitting, say administration, and disadvantages are that it is not readily available. Specialized centers are required, and of course they have to be followed up uh, uh, properly afterwards, because majority of them would develop hypothyroidism later on because the whole of the gland is destroyed. Surgery is indicated if antithyroid drugs fail to control in young patients, or if there is an autonomous toxic nodule, or there is a nodular toxic gutter. So these would be the indication for surgery. And surgery is usually that subtotal that you only leave 6 to 8 grams of thyroid tissue, which is sufficient to produce a normal level of thyroxine in for the patient's requirements. The advantages of surgery are that it would rapidly cure, and cure rate is high. But before surgery, we have to make patient euthyroid. Otherwise, during surgery, a patient is likely to go into a thyroid storm when you handle the tissue, and there's a lot of release of, we discussed this last time as well, there's a lot of release of thyroxine, so the patient may develop thyroid crisis, thyroid storm. The disadvantages of surgery are that 5% of the patient may have a recurrence of the thyrotoxicosis, and sometime it may lead on to, say, hypothyroidism, maybe in 20 to 40% of cases, and other complications like damage to the recurrent range nerve and accidental damage to the parathyroid may manifest as tetany later on. For ophthalmopathy, which is usually quite major concern of the patient, and sometimes, as we said, maybe take on malignant form, you have to have local therapeutic measures like in the form of artificial ointment, so that the eye, there is no exposure keratitis. You use sunglasses and eye patches or nocturnal tapping, or use certain prisms so that they have preservation of their vision. Elevating the head at night can lead on to some regression in the swelling of the orbit and may lead on to some improvement in symptoms. For severe or progressive disease, ophthalmopathy, as we had shown in malignant ophthalmopathy, high dose glucocorticoids, prednisolone, in the dose of 40 milligram daily for 4 to 12 weeks is given, and then it is rapidly tapered off. Sometimes you have to give radiation to the orbit, and this would lead on to some regression of the fibroblast tissues in the orbit. You can combine steroids and radiotherapy, and sometimes you have to just go for a decompression surgery or removal of the soft tissues from the orbit, so proptosis may be reduced a bit. The prognosis of ophthalmopathy is variable. It usually responds to, but sometimes radiation surgery may lead to hypothyroidism or depression. Sometimes there may be mental and physical sluggishness, weight gain, and sometimes these patients after surgery or radiation may require lifelong thyroid replacement medication. If we leave this patient untreated, complications like birth defect in pregnancy, in cases of miscarriage, and even in extreme cases, death may result from arrhythmias or heart failure. The risks with immune-mediated thyroid dysfunctions include that these antibodies can cross the placenta. So in Graves, the uh, thyroid stimulating antibodies and inhibitory antibodies may lead on to, in 1 to 5 neonates may have hyperthyroidism or neonatal Graves caused by maternal transfer, transplacental transfer of thyroid stimulating or immunoglobulins. Incidence of this occurrence is low, but of course this can be seen in certain children. So that's all for today from this about the thyroid Graves' disease thyrotoxicosis, and next time we'll be talking about hypothyroidism or myxedema.